the neutral nation of Orb had become known as a land of peace, but despite this nickname, her rulers were very well aware that in order to ensure this neutrality, a powerful military was needed. And once the capabilities of Zaft's mobile suits became painfully obvious to everyone, it was clear that Orb would need mobile suits herself to keep up. And if you still want some more mecha goodness after this video, you can check out Ryan Tang's new book, Strength of 1000. You'll get an intriguing story written out of love for the mech genre with both real and super robot influences. And in addition to that beautiful artwork on the front, there are additional illustrations featuring unique mech designs on the inside. So if you want to read more about giant robots fighting demonic gods and why humanity is trapped on space colonies, you can get the book for free if you're a Kindle Unlimited user, or $2.99 for the ebook and $14.99 for the paperback. His other two books are currently up for pre-order, and if you buy the first one and sign up to the newsletter with instructions in the back, you will get his fourth one for free. All links, including a free download link for the Kindle app on phone or on PC, are in the description down below. But now, back to the video. Despite the aforementioned neutrality, a top-secret joint effort to develop mobile suits was launched between the Earth Alliance and Morganrate, Orb's leading weapons manufacturer. For the Alliance, this offered a secretive place to develop their 5G weapons, and for Morganrate, it offered them the opportunity to copy as much as possible. And so they secretly began work on their own prototypes. This then resulted in 5 mostly identical Astray prototypes that were initially only distinguishable by their colors. Not only were they identical to themselves, but they also shared many features with their Alliance sister machines. Much of their frame was directly lifted from the X100 frame, and so was their beam technology. The only thing Morganrate was unable to copy was their phase shift armor that rendered them impervious to physical weapons. To counter this, the Astrays had less armor, and the armor that they did have was a special kind of foam metal compound. This then made the Astrays lighter and more maneuverable than their Alliance counterparts, a feature that would also carry over to their respective mass production units. Unfortunately for Orb, all 5 Astrays were stolen due to an unexpected Zaft attack on the colony that they were being produced at. But luckily for Orb, they didn't lose all of their data. At the same time, they were also developing a mass production version known as the M1 Astray on Earth, and these machines retained many of the features of the prototypes. Other than some visual changes to the armor, the biggest change was the hardwired boosters on the backpack. Whereas the prototypes had a hardpoint that was presumably meant for all kinds of backpacks had their development continued. However, one big problem that was also present on the Alliance machines remained: making the machine pilotable for naturals. This was at first partially solved by some behind-the-scenes action that allowed Erica Simmons, the main engineer of the M1, to get her hands on the data of one of the stolen prototype Astray units that was being piloted by a natural. But despite her best efforts and those of the test pilots, the M1 was still extremely difficult for natural pilots to handle. This all changed when they received help from Kira Yamato. To make a long story short, due to circumstances, the Alliance warship this coordinator was serving on had to flee into Orb to evade a Zaft pursuit force, and in exchange for supplies and repairs, he had to use his experience piloting the X-105 Shrike to help perfect the operating system of the M1. And with its newly optimized operating system, the M1 Astray was the most powerful mass production unit of its time, and it was easily capable of holding its own against the later Geist, which was fielded by Zaft near the end of the war. As a testament to its performance, these machines were carried over into the Second Bloody Valentine War, where they were often seen with a new flight unit called the Flight Rotor Shrike Pack. These units were hence designated as the Astray Shrike. During the First Bloody Valentine War, a space-only version of the M1 was also developed, and was designated as the M1A Astray. The biggest differences were improved and additional thrusters, an additional fuel tank to offset the increased fuel consumption, a simplified space-only leg structure that also greatly improved its mobility, and a bigger V-fin that increased its communication abilities. In terms of weaponry, these units would often be seen with a sniper variant of the regular beam rifle. The M1As were mostly used by the Sahakus, one of Orb's 5 noble families, and the one that was also in control of Morganrate. As a result, most would be used to guard the ame-no-mihashira military satellite, a station that was under the Sahaku's control and also served as the production facility of the M1As. A handful also served with the Three Ships Alliance and would be given exclusively to ace pilots such as Barry Ho. Despite the successful combat record of both the M1 and the M1A, they would not get a true successor unit. Instead, they were followed up by the transformable Murasame. While some parts still bear some resemblance, it was quite the departure from the M1. The unit featured two 12.5mm Sea-Wiz on the head and on each wing, two anti-air missiles on each front skirt, a high-energy beam cannon on its tail stabilizer, and a slightly upgraded version of the M1's beam saber, although it did only have one versus the M1's two. Then for extra equipment, it of course had a beam rifle and a plethora of missiles that could be mounted onto the wings. Another strong point of the Murasame was that it also had atmospheric flight capabilities as a mobile suit. Still, despite all of these amazing features, the combat debut of these machines was less than stellar, as they would be routinely defeated during the hunt on the Zaft assault carrier Minerva. But as the war went on, Orb pilots seemed to have familiarized themselves with these high-performance machines and were able to get significantly higher performance out of them. This high performance became especially obvious with ace pilot Andrew Waldfeld behind the controls. Other than its striking golden color, this unit was identical to the regular Murasame. Throughout the war, two variants of the Murasame are known to have existed. The first one was a reconnaissance unit that was simply known as the Murasame Reconnaissance type. The only difference with the regular Murasame was that the tail stabilizer had been replaced with a sensor radome. The second variant was a space-only version and was known as the Ootsukigata. While it retained the ability to transform into a mobile armor mode, its wings were now replaced with a sensor unit and a railgun. It also had extra thrusters and an upgraded fire control system that, in theory, with the help of the new sensor, could identify up to 128 targets and lock onto 32 of them, but in practice this would often be cut in half due to interference from the end jammers. But even with that, the machine was still an excellent artillery and sniper unit. And just as the Murasame replaced the M1 as the general machine, the Ootsukigata would replace the M1A in space. But supposedly it was also made to work in tandem with the M1A, which would suggest that these machines also served, or at least were planned to serve, during the Second Bloody Valentine War. And talking about the Astrays, Orb wasn't the only one making these units. Seeing that the invasion of Orb could not be averted, former leader Uzumi Naraatha decided to pay the ultimate price and self-detonated himself along with all Morganrate facilities to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. This of course also meant that many engineers were now without a job. One of these was Yoon Se-fan, a gearhead who managed to evade the Alliance and found work with the Junk Guild. Other than her usual engineer work, she also set out to create a whole new mobile suit for them, the Reista. Although maybe calling it a new mobile suit isn't exactly the correct term. You might have noticed that Reista is an anagram of Astray. This machine was in fact made with about 40% M1 Astray parts. Why about 40%? Well, that's because it was made mostly out of scavenged parts. Still, with the war raging on, there were probably more than enough wrecks to mass produce these machines and to sell them to people who wanted a mobile suit in a very similar way as one would sell a car. You had the base model, which looked a bit boring but still had some cool features like hardpoints, legs that could transform to grab containers, and something rarely seen on military mobile suits, handlebars around the cockpit and on the cockpit hatch. And then you had various option parts to make your Astray, your Reista, look cooler and more personalized. And to absolutely no one's surprise, one of the most popular options was the Gundam head pack. Other than looking cool, it also offered better sensors, so there was some use to this. And talking about functionality, while people who bought these units were contractually forbidden from equipping them with weapons, these machines were still completely capable of using weapons. Something that the Junk Guild once had to do themselves when they came under attack from the Earth Alliance. Another Astray variant was also developed by the Junk Guild, but this time in cooperation with the DSSD research group. They were looking for a worker unit that could also serve as a combat unit in case of emergency, and the result was a civilian Astray DSSD custom. The two most striking things about this unit were the visor, which served to protect the delicate sensors behind it from space debris, and its propulsion system. This was a combination of traditional thrusters and a new prototype electromagnetical propulsion system that was later also used in the Stargazer Gundam. Although this combination granted it finer controls in addition to being less polluting, they didn't benefit the mobile suit in battle. But despite not being a combat mobile suit, it still packed enough of a punch to pose a threat if used in high enough numbers. Then once the DSSD's quota was met, the Junk Guild also began selling these to civilians, which again led to many customizations. The most famous one was probably Leon's Grave's Purple Astray, but as a mercenary he wanted something a bit more geared towards combat. So he changed many of the internal parts to more combat-suited ones. The two more obvious changes were a slightly different head with sensors that were better suited for sniping, and a power receiving unit on the backpack that sounds very similar to the Impulse's Deuterion beam system. This machine was then appropriately dubbed the Arms Astray PMC Custom. The DSSD Custom was also further developed by the Junk Guild themselves and resulted into the cheaper civilian Astray Junk Guild Custom. It was largely the same unit and would be manufactured on the same production line to keep costs to a minimum. The biggest difference seems to be the backpack that was copied from the Astray prototypes that also housed two beam sabers. And just as the aforementioned Reista, this thing would also feature various option parts. But ironically enough, after the first production run, the Gundam head option now became more or less standardized because so many people disliked the DSSD Custom's visor head. So now the visor head and the chin bar became optional parts. Many other Astray prototype replica parts could also be bought as option parts, and while expensive, this was often a small price to pay for the pilots who wanted a more legit looking machine. They did nothing for the machine's performance though. So let's wrap up this video with the three most well-known modifications of the Junk Guild Custom. We've got the civilian Astray Zero Custom, which was modified to look like the blue frame and featured a metric shit ton of weapons, including a genuine IWSP striker pack courtesy of Lucas O'Donnell. And talking about lookalikes, there was the Gundam Astray Violence Geist, which was piloted by an imposter of Lo Gul, the pilot of the Astray Red Frame. And yet the mostly black Violence Geist was nicknamed Fake Red because it had red lights installed on it. Just paint the damn thing red if you want to impersonate Lo. Our final machine then was the Turn Delta, modified by the man himself, Lo Gul. This thing was a combination of the Delta Astray and the Junk Guild Custom, resulting in quite a unique appearance. It got its name from the triangle-shaped Voiture Lumière system on its back, and the L in its model number stood for Lo. And to make things come full circle, this machine was later used to upgrade the first machine we talked about in this video, Lo's Gundam Astray Red Frame. This machine then became known as the Gundam Astray Red Frame Kai. And I almost forgot about yet another custom civilian Astray, the Mars Jacket. And rather than having replica parts, these parts came directly from the Gundam Astray Red Frame Mars Jacket. As a result, this unit not only looked like the real deal, but also performed like the real deal. And that is all for the development history of the M1 Astray, a machine with a surprising amount of variations once you start looking past the anime. To be honest, I wasn't planning on doing this video immediately after the Dagger development, but the results of the poll didn't lie. Anyways, a big thank you to Ryan Tang for sponsoring this video, and as always, another big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope all of you watching have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.